Engines roared through the black void and the fractured ice of a world called Harkoon. Fire pillars, tall as towers, walked across the night. The battlefield was a map of sorrow, crater lights, broken hulls, smoke rising like tired ghosts. A storm clawed at the sky, flashing blue with inandout lightning from wounded shields. Wind hissed through glassed sand, past a ridge of black stone carved into teeth by old rivers. Across that ridge ran a woman who refused to be told when to die. Her name was Major Lena Ravel of the 22nd Forward Banner, Sol Guard. Her armor, matte and scarred, bled sparks at every seam. A white banner lay tangled across her back, the fabric scorched but whole, the same banner stitched by the families of her unit when the war was still young enough to pretend to be tidy. Lena moved like a storm's shadow. She slid into a ditch filled with ash drift, listened, and lifted her head an inch. Gunfire clapped like hard hands. The enemy's walkers stamped through the ruins beyond the ridge, all red eyes and iron knees searching for survivors. Above them, an orbital cruiser bellowed with distant detonations like a tired animal. A human dropship spiraled down, clipped wing, and went to pieces across the salt flats. The comms were a chorus of broken promises, static vowels, the crack of a flare. Somewhere, far away, a voice kept repeating a line like a dirge. They say the cubs fell. The cubs fell in the eastern burrows. The cry holds are gone. Lena listened because the voice kept trying to be calm. Voices like that can hold the world together for one more minute. The wind smelled of hot metal and mountain ice. The ground under her fist was too warm. The sand was glass in places, still cooling from the sky lance hours before. Her visor showed a tiny trail of warm dots, moving irregularly through a canyon of broken conduits and ruined hatchways. Not soldiers, not machines. The shapes were small, each with a frantic, fluttering heartbeat, not human. Cubs, they had said the cubs fell. Lena touched the banner on her back. She had sworn to carry it until the day she could hand it back to the families that had sown it. War collected vows the way a storm collected gulls. Some vows were light. Some vows were difficult. Some vows were the only thing you had left. She studied the broken trench once more and with a low breath crawled. The first cub she found was pressed under a caved beam in a culvert, its fur matted with ash. A small paw twitched at her touch. The creature's eyes were thin amber coins in a soot-black face, and it flinched from the light. The armor's servos, a gentle whine, made it blink. Behind this one, two more pressed deep into the culvert, breathed smoke, and stared at her with that flat, shocked look children hold when the world has stopped making sense. Lena put down her rifle and levered the beam aside with a hiss of hydraulic muscle. She spoke softly, not really words, more the rhythm of something meant to be soothing. Her voice came out low in her chest, steady and round, like the old lullabies her mother sang back in the oxygen farms on Cerulean. 6 more small shapes watched her from the shadow behind the first 3. Cubs, hearts beating too fast, ears pinned. They were not human. They were Harkoon young, thick-furred, long-limbed, pupils too sharp, mouths made for winter and meat. The Harkoon adults fought like furious storms. Their elites wore bone-white armor and carried blades that sang in the cold air. But the cubs smelled of milk and dust and heat. In a clean world, the sight of them would be a simple thing. In this world, it was a choice. Lena made the choice. She unclipped her banner. White through ash, it unfurled with a whisper. The fabric was stronger than steel and softer than summer. She slid the cubs onto it, small shapes, trembling, then wrapped them, layer over layer. The banner swallowed her regiment's crest and hid the marks of the dead. It became a cradle. Easy, she said. That was a word the cubs would not understand, but tone transcended language. Easy. Above ground, another sky lance rode a white wound across the clouds and came down roaring. The trench shuddered. Distant screams stitched through the calm. Lena tied the remaining length of banner to her chest harness and shouldered the bundle. It was heavy in a way that felt honest. The storms edged through sleet like gravel. Lena climbed out of the culvert and stood tall into the wind. Her armor's systems growled. She clicked her visor down. Red targeting lines crawled across the horizon. She adjusted the bundle once, found its balance, then began to run. The war on Harkoon had started because someone could not imagine a stranger's reasons for being brave. The coalition needed ore, the Harkoon refused the dig, and the first blasts took the mountain that mattered most to both. The mountain had a name in the Harkoon tongue that meant, roughly, the place where voices linger. Human maps labeled it Node 8. It was easier to shell a number. 2 days earlier, the 22nd Banner took the southern ridge. It was a clean run. Lena's company built a field hospital in the lee of an old basalt finger and guarded the cry holds, underground caverns where Harkoon females, elderly and cubs waited out the artillery. They had made a promise. It was recorded and signed. The Harkoon elders sent a gift, a bowl of stone salt for courage and a bone flute with a low, honest song. Then the sky lances fell without warning. The enemy wasn't Harkoon. It was a third party with iron ships and the ethics of a landslide Harvest League raiders who wore no flags and sold grief by the ton. They came through the orbital gaps when the coalition pulled their pickets for repair. They hunted survivors. They cut out evidence. They raised cry holds first. When the Harvest League blew the ridge, Lena's company died under it. The hospital burned. The feeds filled with smoke and voices, then cleaned to silence. One of the Harkoon elders had said, in a voice like falling snow, "If the cubs fall, our world falls with them. We will not forgive." Lena had promised. She had stood there with the white banner on her back and promised. You do not promise to a people who count their winters and expect to be forgiven when you fail. She ran. The storm threw light like knives. The fur-wrapped bundle against her back shivered each time the wind hit. Lena sank low and crossed a field of shattered hex solar plates. Each one chimed under her boots. She could feel the enemy's red eyes scanning for her heat. She carried the cubs high to keep them above the drifting dust. A walker turned its head. Its mouthless face had sensors like pearls. Lena slid behind a culvert, drew her sidearm, and waited for the machine's next step to mask the sound. When it came, she fired twice, sharp and clean. The walker's knee was a bright joint, hit there, and the machine lurched and sank. She moved before it finished falling. "Major," said a voice in her ear, rough with static. "Major Ravel, if you're alive, respond." It was Colonel D, her old instructor. Even static couldn't strip the steadiness from his tone. "We're pulling back to the river line. Harvest League is burning everything from the ridge to the salt flats. We have no bird for you. We have nothing for you. Do you understand?" Lena did not answer. She needed the silence. She needed the wind and her breath and the small sounds behind her ear, tiny hearts, muffled whimpers like sleeping kittens, the soft knock of paw against paw. She angled toward the east burrows where the warm dots on her visor flickered. The map was a ruin. The burrow entrances had been glassed. The heat signatures came from deep, likely an air pocket under a collapsed storage slab. If there were cubs in there, they would die in hours. She had to lift them free. She slid down a throat of broken alloy and entered the old transit tube network. The air smelled like wet limestone and iron. Water ran in thin sheets down the tunnel walls with a sound like nails on glass. In her shoulders, muscles burned and settled to a deeper fire. She moved hunched to keep the bannered bundle from knocking loose on the jagged ceilings. Her visor's light lit the way in a narrow cone, walls flashing white, then black like a heartbeat. She found the survivors by sound. They were singing. The Harkoon sang when they were afraid, low, chest-deep tones that sounded like wails under ice. It was a bravery, a way to count breath. The song trembled in the air and made her armor hum like a tuning fork. A narrow red light shivered, then steadied. Lena put down the bundle and used her gauntlets to pull at slabs of radiator fins. Her fingers ached. The armor's muscle cords groaned. She cut through a bar with a micro torch. The metal spat and spun and fell. The opening was just wide enough to swallow her shoulders. She slid inside. The air was hot and wet, stale. She moved on her side and felt the beam overhead quiver. The face she saw first belonged to a Harkoon female elder, fur white-shot, muzzle narrow. Her eyes narrowed to points in the human light. Her forearms were cut and raw. Behind her close were 8 smaller faces. The older cubs put themselves in front of the younger. That was a thing no species had to learn. Lena turned off her visor light and waited for hearts to slow. She put her hand on her chest. She tapped her armor twice, human friend. It was a thing she had taught her company to use across languages when time was thin. Once with a different people, that gesture had meant, I carry water, I will share. On Harkoon, she hoped it meant the same. A long second. Then the elder tapped her own chest, clumsy in the tight space. She made a sound like a chuff. Lena tasted relief like sweet salt. She took 2 cubs at a time. She passed them through the slit to the bundle and wrapped and tucked, until the white of the banner was a broad bandage, until the cubs were sleeping smudges swaddled in promises. The elder refused to climb through first. Her hand stayed on the last cub's shoulder. Last, Lena said, because she understood even without words. I know. She got them all out. She got the elder out. She took their hands with her hands. She gave water. She broke open a ration brick and watched the elder sniff and bite as if it were bark. The cub's fur flattened as the heat eased. Their eyes were less like points. Major, Colonel D again. Say something, damn it. Lena breathed and said, carrying. Static snapped. Carrying what? There was a pause. She could imagine him at a map table, jaw clenched. She could imagine someone in long sleeves saying, we have nothing left. Some days those were the only phrases anyone had. Cubs, Lena said. Silence, then a sigh that felt like the first exhale after a nightmare. God help me, do you know where the lines are? Wherever I walk, Lena whispered. For now. Understood, D said. He didn't argue. He had trained her to make one unshakable choice and pay for it. If you reach the river, follow it north. We're setting a hard point at the iron bridge. You'll be safe there if the bridge is still there when you arrive. If, she said. The raiders had drones with sound like hornets and lights like Christmas. They flew them through the tubes. The drones dropped microflame, ate oxygen, and chased warm. Lena had stolen the banner fabric from a science team when the war began. It was a graphene weave with a reactive coating. It stuck to heat like a lover and hid it like a blanket. She used it now to wrap the cubs, folded twice, then thrice, until her armor's thermal signature looked like one soldier with a heavy pack. She smeared the outer layers with mud from a seep. She snapped a coolant line and let the vapor spill around her like a cloud. They moved. They stopped when drones clicked in the dark. They slid behind a tangle of cables and waited while the drones blinked by like bored fireflies. Lena timed her steps between the drones' hissing turns. The elder's breath burned in the narrow tunnels like a small motor. The cubs made chicken noises when they were scared. The smallest one sounded like a squeaky hinge. Lena put her hand back to squeeze a paw and the shaking eased. At a bend where the ceiling dropped to knee height, the tunnel opened into a machine room as large as a cathedral. A black pool lay in the center. It smelled of old lubricant and bitter iron. Suspended above it, a decommissioned Harkoon turbine hung like an altar. The walls were carved with deep, careful marks, not letters but essences: bear, river, moon. They had worshipped maintenance here. The Harkoon were like that. They prayed to what is necessary. Harvest League scouts moved along the far catwalks, boots clicking on steel. The scouts were lean, wrapped in dark cloth, faces masked, rifles quiet. They came with humorless speed, like hunger. Light from their helmets sliced across the machine room and turned every edge into a blade. Lena stepped back into shadow but kept moving. Her armor could not carry her forever. Batteries bled faster in cold and fear. She slipped behind the turbine, felt the old machine's heat ghost, and pressed herself against the curved shell with the cubs tucked between her and the metal. She shut her visor lights and slowed her breath until her chest rose and fell like tide. The elder did the same, chest against her shoulder, heavy and steady, like leaning against an old tree. Another sky lance hit above, closer. The floor shuddered. Dust fell in a slow curtain. A scout shone a light through the dust just as it settled on Lena's armor. The light caught the white of the banner, corner of his eye, a tiny thing. People die for tiny things. The scout turned his head. Lena did not move. She became stone. She became cold equipment. The cub pressed its nose into the crook of her arm and held like it was holding the last warm breath in the world. Scout's light moved on. Lena breathed again. The elder chuffed soft approval, the simple sound of courage shared. They reached daylight as the storm eased and the edges of Harkoon's twin suns burned through the clouds. The horizon was a line of broken teeth. The river looked like a black scar slashed across the white flats. Smoke rose at the far bank where the iron bridge should be. Between her and the river ran a field of machines, a raider pack red with warning paint, quick as thought, low as wolves, drones, two-wheeled strikers, three walkers. Above, a blister on the sky moved like a curse, an orbital ISAT hunting small miracles. She could not outrun them with the cubs, she could not wait in the open. She looked left. A line of old wind towers bent over a field. Each tower had a hung bell for winter winds. The bells lay twisted, mouths down, chimes gone to rust. But the posts were iron, thick as a thigh. The field hummed with half-dead power in her boots. Lena cut toward the towers. She had 10 smoke flares, a spool of monofilament, 6 charges, and the kind of stubborn that gets called a flaw by quiet men at secure tables. She set the flares in a shallow curve under the towers. She strung the monofilament shoulder high. She knotted charges to cables and ran them back to a fused box she ripped out of a tower's belly. She dug holes with her hands and laid out shards of the broken solar plates under an inch of dust to reflect heat wrong. She breathed in lines and angles. She looked at the ground the way a predator does, but her prey was certainty. In the wrecked sky, the ISAT looked away for a breath. When it looked back, Lena fired the flares and the field boiled with false signatures. The raiders turned toward the heat. The first striker hit the filament and its rider fell, throat opened by nothing. The second kept going and skated across a drift of glass that behaved like ice. It flipped and clawed air. Lena detonated the charges. Towers fell. Bells sang chainsaw notes and hit earth. A walker stepped into a hole and its hip went sideways. It screamed with hydraulics and spat sparks. Drones dropped to nose their dead. Lena ran through the dust and fire and falling bells, carrying the bundled cubs and the elder. She ran through the gap she had drawn on the world and out the other side before the raiders understood that the world was suddenly not about them. She reached the river. It was wide and mean, angry with melt, black with ash. It spoke in a deep tongue against its stones. The iron bridge on the far bank still stood, though one span hung like a broken elbow and the deck was a quilt of holes. Human soldiers in smoke-gray armor stood on the near tower, faces chalked and hard. They looked like Lena's people, tired, stubborn, still standing because standing was what they had left. "Major," someone shouted. "We thought you." She didn't answer. She stepped into the river. The cold came up like knives. The banner tightened against her chest where she had knotted it. She held her breath against the pain and kicked. The water grabbed at her shins. It tried to take her. The current was a hand on her thigh, another on her hip. The river was not an enemy. It was entirely itself, merciless and honest. It wanted everything. The elder leapt in beside her and swam with a heavy, strong motion, mouth closed, eyes narrow against spray. For one breath, Lena thought, of course she can swim this. She has survived winters here longer than my world has been at peace. And she thought, courage is sometimes only watching someone else be brave and then deciding not to shame them by failing. They crossed together. They crawled onto the iron bank and lay there coughing, eyes closed, lungs punching. The cubs woke and cheeped, whined, then settled as Lena rocked them like she had seen mothers do in markets on a world she would never see again. All along the ridge, raiders moved like ants toward the bridge. The field of towers smoked. The bells kept singing as they cooled, long hollow notes that felt like final prayers. Lena got her knees under her and stood. Her armor dripped. She looked like a ruin because she was. The white banner, soaked and fouled, clung to her and the small shape she carried. She walked to the soldiers at the bridge head, who stared at the bundle with wide eyes because it was wrapped in the mark of their dead. The 22nd banner's crest faint under mud. They said the cubs fell. One of the soldiers whispered because the rumor had gone out and shaped how human hearts would break. They said. Lena shifted the bundle and the white fabric loosened. Heads like young bears, eyes like coins, noses damp and bright. The smallest blinked and sneezed. The sound was ridiculous and holy. She carried them past the drop gate, through racks of spare magazines and carved wounds in the decking. She carried them to an aid station that had once been a cargo crate. Inside, medics paused as if music had stopped. Lena laid the cubs down on a clean field blanket. She stood above them, guarding with her body, ragged and silent. The elder stood beside her and put her hand, that strong, scarred hand, on Lena's shoulder. The gesture was new. It meant everything. For a breath, the war took one single step back and let the world breathe. Outside, the raiders tried the bridge and were bled for it. Inside, humans with gloves and gentle eyes worked on paws and muzzles, gave warm broth with tubes, set small bones. Someone found a harpoon heater and lit it, and the air turned sweet, like cinnamon bark and animal sleep. A cub's ear trembled in the heat and then relaxed. Lena had been carrying her breath tight in her chest for hours. She let it go. It felt like a debt paid with blood. She looked around for a place to lean and found a bulkhead. She pressed her head against cool iron and closed her eyes just to feel what closed eyes felt like. She slept for 1 minute and 50 seconds. Her watch recorded it. In that minute, dreams came like half-forgotten voices in a kitchen, water, a window, a hand on a shoulder. She woke with tears on her face and couldn't tell whether they were for the dead or the living, but tears are honest work. Major Ravel. Colonel D stood in the door, flanked by 2 officers with ash on their collars. He looked at the bundle, at the white banner, at the cubs who were now alive in a world that had taken so much care to kill them. His face changed. Something old lifted off his shoulders and fell behind him unseen. "You did it," he said softly. "She did," said the elder. Her voice was like low thunder in a canyon. The human auto-translator on her throat made slow work of it. The words came out with gentle fuzz, but the room understood. She put her hand back on Lena's shoulder. "She carried our voices." Outside, shells rang like gongs against the bridge's plates. The raiders kept coming because hunger does not understand when to stop. On the far ridge, someone lit a flare that burned bright as a singular small star. Human snipers opened the world's eyelids with cold patience. A harpoon war horn answered, deep as ancient earth, somewhere beyond the smoke. The horn was not raider, it was harpoon. It came multiplied by echoes, rising another until the air trembled. On the near bank, eyes opened wider. On the far bank, 3 shapes stood up through the smoke. Harpoon warriors in bone-white armor, bearing flags woven from what looked like snow. They had come from the deep burrows, drawn by the rumor that their future had ended. They saw now that it had not. They roared across the river like a breaking wall. They tore into the raiders with blades that sang in cold air. Sometimes all a battle needs is grief that has somewhere to go. The raiders broke. Hunger finally met a price it could not afford. Their drones burned like moths. Their walkers went to their knees and did not rise. Some jumped the edge of the far bank and ran across the salt flats, and the horizon took them as horizons do. Lena did not cheer. She watched with eyes full and empty. She felt heat at her hip, the white banner drying. She touched it and drew her hand away. There were brown smears on the fabric, small paw prints. She pressed her palm over one and found it smaller than the space between her fingers. In the days that followed, a council came to the bridge. The Harkoon elders, tall and narrow-eyed and grave as statues cut from frost, crossed at noon when the light was strongest. The bridge had a new span, rough but good. They walked with their heads high and brought salt and wool and a flute that sang like winter light. The human commanders met them under a tarp hung crooked between an iron girder and an overturned striker. There were no smart tables. There were voices, hands, and the plain, terrible memory of fire. The elders demanded to see the one who had carried their cubs. Lena walked into the circle because the colonel looked at her, and she came when called like a soldier should. She stood there with ash on her boots, white banner folded over her arm like a blue sky caught in cloth. It had been cleaned and dried, but the paw prints remained, a faded trail across the crest of the 22nd. An elder reached out. His hand shook. Not from age, from how hard he was holding himself together. He touched the banner with 2 fingers and lifted them to his brow. It was a foreign gesture. It needed no translation. "We counted our winters," said the elder through the translator, voice flat and ancient. "We counted the dead. Then news ran through the burrows like fire in dry moss. They said our cubs fell in battle. They said the cry holds were ash. They said we were alone in the dark. They said the hungry wore human faces." He looked at Lena until her bones felt like glass. "Then she returned," he said, and his voice gained a slow iron weight, carrying them wrapped in her banner. The river threw light into the tarp's shade. It painted faces with moving water. The wind smelled today like rain on old stone. The hiss of cooling metal drifted in from the repaired span. Someone adjusted a radio and made it stop whining. In the pause between breaths, a new thing began. "We do not forget," the elder said. "We make our world with acts we can hold in our hands. We will not forget this one." He turned to his people. They bowed their heads. "The war is not over, but we will not take fire to the homes of those who carry our young. We will not answer this with winter. We will stand beside the ones who made a place for us to breathe." The humans breathed out at once like a wall of lungs. Lena's legs shook. She locked her knees. She did not know how to carry praise any more than she had known how to carry those small lives across a river that wanted her. The elder reached for her hand. His palm was calloused, the skin thick with work. He folded her fingers around the bone flute he had brought. It was heavy and warm and sang distantly at her touch. "Hold this," he said. "When you are tired, play it. It wakes the brave songs." After that, the front changed its shape. Raiders found fewer places to hide. Harkoon and human patrols learned each other's jokes. Medics traded herbs for antibiotics and made tea that tasted like wood smoke and peace. Children's laughter returned to the burrows and the bridge both. It sounded like birds that had been away too long. Sometimes late, when the sky lances stayed their knives and the river's voice was the loudest thing, Lena walked the bridge. The white banner lay clean across her shoulders, its weight familiar. When the wind rose, it pulled at the fabric like a curious child. She would stop and let it talk. Her company, the 22nd, was a roll call of ghosts. She spoke their names to the river one by one when the moon came alive and every stone looked like an eye. She told the river what they had loved. A good shuttle engine's first purr, cards in a cargo hold, fire on cold hands, cinnamon on coffee, old songs. The river took the names and made them part of the dark. It would carry them to the salt sea. That was a decent grave. She did not think she had done anything deserving of legend. She had done the work in front of her. She had made the choice her promise demanded. The story had already run ahead of her, though. It ran like wild grain across systems, turning to language as it went. In some mouths, the cubs were angelic, in others, monstrous. In some mouths, she fought a dragon. In others, she lifted a mountain. People need their stories shaped sharp so they can carry them. Sometimes, in the middle of these renditions, someone would say, "Humans are like that. They hold what others drop." That line went further than the rest. It crossed the places maps don't draw. It climbed stairs to rooms with flags on the walls and asked for a seat. Weeks later, a strange ship came through the black above Harkoon. Its hull gleamed with patient wealth and deeds done quietly, the kind of power that dresses in gray to be mistaken for a cloud. The sigil on its side was 3 lines in a circle, an old mark, older than the Coalition, older than Harkoon's written winters. It belonged to the Arbiter's Congregate, a council that only appeared when fires got large enough to be seen from space. The Arbiters requested testimony at the bridge. They wanted statements and signatures, and the order in which things fell. Lena stood before them under the iron span. Her hands shook a little. She was still very tired. "We are told," said the Arbiter with the softest voice, "that this war pivoted on a very small fulcrum." He looked at the cubs, now running with loud feet between human boots and Harkoon paws, sticky with fruit, fur full of dust. "And we are told that fulcrum had a human name." Lena told him about the noise the drones made in the dark. She told him about the heat of the river on the bones of the wrist, the way the elder's hand had felt, the sound of bells falling and the taste of glass dust, the fact that courage has a smell, hot metal and cold fear, and something that makes you remember kitchens. She told him stress fractures and battery drain and angles of charge and the distance between one breath and the next when a light falls across you and you are made of stone. She did not mention legend. She mentioned work. The Arbiter listened the way a calm lake listens to a mountain, old and still and full of understanding. "We will write this down," he said in the end, "because some stories hold bridges up when bolts fail." He looked at the banner on Lena's shoulder. He was old enough to know a flag is only cloth until someone bleeds under it. "You kept this white," he said. It was not quite a question. Lena's mouth quirked. "For a while," she said. She touched, as if by accident, the small smears, the brown prints. Then it learned a better color. He smiled, small and real. "You are the kind of human whose gravity bends events," he said. "It is good sometimes for galaxies to be pulled." Harkoon's winter returned as a gift that year instead of a sentence. The snow lay clean on the burrows. A bell hung from the new tower at the bridge and sang when the wind wanted it to. Humans learned to run on ice without falling. Harkoon learned to drink coffee without making faces. Children made a game of telling the river their names so it could carry them like rumors to the sea. New banners were stitched by hands from both worlds. Some were white, some gray. One, stitched by the elder who had put her hand on Lena's shoulder, was white with a small brown trail across its crest. Only those who knew looked and saw paw prints. When the Harvest League tried again on a different world, they found fewer doors open. Harkoon and humans came together in ugly drop barges that looked like tools, not boasts. They landed heavy and low, made the small choices, and cut hunger down where it stood. Again and again, that was the work. Say no to the simple cruelty. Get between the fire and the children. Build the bridge. Hold the line. Carry the small weight because it will be a bigger weight if you don't. Lena played the bone flute at the end of each day. The notes were low and round. They sounded like a walk home in good boots. The cubs, those first ones and the ones after, because life does not stop if you make room for it, liked to sleep by her feet when she played. Soldiers, too, drifted closer. It wasn't a concert. It was the restitching of something torn. Years later, on a world with 2 moons and insects that sang like tinfoil in summer, a young lieutenant with hands too clean stopped Lena on a path beside a supply depot. He stammered. He was trying to be brave in a new way. He said he had heard the story. He asked if it was true. Lena thought of the river, the bells, the peptide smell of fear. She thought of ash and bright eyes and the way the elder's hand had felt on her shoulder, heavy and holy. She thought of the banner, damp and white and then not so white, wrapped around something that does not belong to only one people. She said, "It was just the work we had." The lieutenant nodded like a door closing softly. He squared his shoulders and went to go do his piece of it. On nights when the war slept, the stars above Harkoon looked like sparks from a forge, leaping and fading and leaping again. The bridge kept its shape in the dark. The river talked in its deep, old voice. In the cry holds, now full of breath, elders told a story to cubs who fell asleep before the end and dreamed with warm mouths and soft paws. In human kitchens in cities a dozen jumps away, parents told the same story in simpler words to children who would grow hands steady enough to lift heavy things without dropping them. They said the cubs fell. Stories often begin with a lie because truth needs a hill to climb. And then she returned, carrying them wrapped in her banner. After that, men and women and those between stitched a new vow into the hems of their own flags. It was quiet as a prayer and heavy as iron. It cut through radio static and distance and the habit of despair. We carry, not because we are the strongest or the best, or because we know the right way the first time. We carry because there are winters to be endured and rivers to be crossed and small lives to put between cloth and sky. We carry even when our hands shake, even when we are told we have nothing left to carry with. The war burned and cooled and burned again somewhere far away. The bridge stood. The banner moved in the wind with a sound like memory. Lena's hair went gray where the helmet rubbed it. The elder's laugh got lower and more dangerous. The cubs stopped being cubs. They grew teeth and stories. They joined the patrols. They sat in councils. They taught each other the vowels of their names, then spoke with voices that belonged on the same day. When the last bell of that long winter finally sang itself flat, the last raider drone drifted down like a moth out of ideas and hit the river and vanished. Those on the bridge exhaled in one breath like a giant animal discovering it had survived the season. At dusk, Lena stood at the center of the span, bone flute in her pocket, banner over her shoulder, eyes on the line where sky met water. The elder came to stand beside her. They did not speak. There was no need. The wind moved as if carrying a story from one side of the river to the other. It smelled of metal and snow and clean hope. The stars came one by one as if beginning a count. Sometimes victory isn't a cheer. Sometimes it's the simple fact of the next breath and the weight you still choose to carry. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures.